My name is Edward. I am 74 years old. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and for 31 years I was the principal of a K-12 school in the St. Vital district that I built from 400 students to 1,100. And at my retirement dinner in 2018, the mayor came, and the speech he gave used the word pillar, and 3 people cried, and one of them was me. I have been a deacon at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church since 1994, which means I have been reading scripture in front of the same congregation for 30 years, and have become, in that time, the voice they associate with the good parts of the service. I want to say something about the faith, because I am going to be asked about it and I want to have the answer ready. The faith is real. I am not going to tell you that a man who has done what I have done for 22 years has a simple relationship with the text he reads at the lectern, because he does not. But I am going to tell you that the relationship is genuine, and that the texts I have read are not performances of belief, but actual belief, and that I have sat with the contradiction of being a man who believes in the things he reads, and who has also done the things he has done, and the sitting has been painful, and I have not resolved it, and I do not expect to resolve it in December or after. What I have found, across 30 years of reading those texts, is that the texts themselves are less interested in resolution than people assume. The passage I am reading on the Sunday before December 15th, 1 Corinthians 13, does not promise resolution. It describes love as an endurance. I have read that as a comfort and as an accusation, depending on the year, and I expect to read it in both registers on that Sunday, and I expect to mean it in both registers, and I think the congregation will hear it as they always hear it, which is in the register they need at the moment, and I hope that remains true. I have been a deacon at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church since 1994. I have 7 grandchildren. The oldest is 14 and plays hockey and has my eyebrows. The youngest is 8 months old and has not yet developed specific features, though my daughter Rachel says she can see my chin, and I choose to believe her. My wife Margaret and I have been married for 46 years. She is the most reliable person I have ever known, and she has been faithful to me without reservation and without any particular reward for it. And I want that on the record before I tell you the rest, because the rest is the rest, and Margaret is not the rest. There is a boy in Nakhon Ratchasima who is 11 years old. His name is Krit. He plays football, and he is, according to his mother, strong at mathematics and poor at sitting still, which is a combination I recognize at a significant depth. He does not know my name. He knows there is a foreign man who sends money every month, in Thai baht, through a transfer service, to an account his mother manages. He has been told, when he has asked, that the man is a business associate of his grandmother's who is generous to the family. I do not know whether this will hold as he grows older. I expect it will not. I have been constructing the answer to the day it doesn't hold for about 11 years, and I have not finished. I am telling you this because I am going to tell my family in December. Not because I have been found out. I have not been found out, not in 22 years, in a way that is both my longest sustained achievement and the thing I am most ashamed of, but because I am 74, and I have prostate cancer, slow-moving, manageable, but at the stage where a man's relationship to time changes, and the thing that changed when time changed is that I stopped being able to live with the possibility that my children would read about this in an estate, rather than hearing it from me. That is the whole reason for this recording, and the whole reason for the December plan, and I want to put it on record first, before the story, because the story without the December plan is just a man confessing to a camera, and I have been doing that, silently, for 22 years, and I am not interested in another version of silence. So let me divide it properly. I am going to give you both sides, fairly, and I am going to explain how a man runs both for 22 years and does not collapse. And I am going to tell you the cost, which is not money, though there is money, and I am going to end with December. I first went to Thailand in 2001. The school was growing, the budget cycle was exhausting, and my doctor told me in February of that year that I was working at a pace that would be visible on an EKG if I did not find a way to decompress. And my colleague Jerry, who had been to Chiang Mai twice and spoke about it with the specific reverence of a man who has found a thing he cannot explain to people who haven't been, suggested I go. I went for 2 weeks in July, while Margaret visited her sister in Vancouver, and I want to describe what happened in those 2 weeks without any dramatics, because the dramatics came later and the beginning was simpler. I felt well. That is the whole of it. I had not felt well in several years in the way I felt well in Chiang Mai. Not medicated well or vacation well, but the specific wellness of a man whose body has stopped carrying the weight of his job for long enough to remember it was once capable of something else. I walked. I ate. I slept without the school in the room with me. On the 10th day I met Nok. Nok was 31 in 2001. She worked at the front desk of the guest house where I was staying near the old city, and she spoke English well. She had studied at Chiang Mai University and worked at the guest house to support her younger brother's school fees. And we talked most evenings in the small courtyard where the guests gathered. The talking was not romantic initially. It was two people who found each other interesting, which is the rarest thing that happens to a man of 52, or to anyone, and which I did not identify for about 3 days. On the 13th evening I asked her to dinner and she said yes, and we walked to a place near the Saturday market and ate for 2 hours, and I told her about the school, and she told me about her family in Nakhon Ratchasima, and we split the bill because she insisted, and I went back to my room and lay on the bed and understood, without any particular process of reasoning, that something had happened that I had not planned and that I was going to have to decide what to do about it. That decision, or rather the specific form of not deciding that I chose, has been the architecture of my life for 22 years. I went back in November of that year. I told Margaret I was attending an education conference in Vancouver. The conference was real. I did not attend it. I was in Chiang Mai for 8 days, and Nok was there, and by the end of those 8 days we had entered into an arrangement that I have never been able to name properly, which is not an affair in the way affairs are usually described, hot, reckless, destined to end, but something slower and more serious, and I understand now, more costly, precisely because of its seriousness. We were together, over the following years, in the way that two people can be together, across the distance of a career, and a continent, and a marriage. I went to Thailand twice a year, in July and in December, while Margaret visited family. We spoke on the phone. We corresponded by email, on an account I created for this purpose that I have never stopped maintaining, and that sits on my laptop in a folder labeled Insurance Documents, which is both a practical deception and, I think, an unconscious confession, because every insurance document is about what you owe and what you cannot avoid paying. Across 22 years I have been to Thailand 41 times. I have not, in all those years, told a single other living person. I want to give you the 2 lives in honest parallel, because this recording is not a confession designed to make me look better than I am, and the parallel is the only truthful way to hold it. I want to give you the 2 lives in honest parallel, because this recording is not a confession designed to make me look better than I am, and the parallel is the only truthful way to hold it. I want to hold the question of crit separately from everything else, because it is the question that is hardest, and the one that has changed most clearly what I am prepared to do in December. I should give you the years between 2001 and 2013 honestly, because they contain the version of myself I find hardest to explain. The version is this: a man who has decided to do something he knows is wrong, and who has managed it for 12 years without rupture, and who has in those 12 years been, in all observable respects, an excellent husband and father and principal and deacon, not as a performance but genuinely, because the 2 lives were genuinely separate and genuinely good, and he experienced them as 2 true things rather than as 1 true thing and 1 false one. I am not asking you to accept that framing. I am asking you to understand that it was my framing, that I held it without significant distress for most of those years, and that the lack of distress is probably the most uncomfortable detail in this entire recording, because a man who is suffering from his double life is a man who is paying for it. And for 12 years I was not suffering, I was living, and the living was good in both registers. And the only lie I was telling was Margaret, and the lie was structural, which means I was lying by not saying something rather than by saying something false, and I had managed to make that distinction feel important when it was, in fact, not. Nak and I did not discuss our arrangement across those years in the way that people in arrangements discuss them, because the arrangement was not a discussion. It was a fact that each visit either sustained or didn't, and for 12 years it sustained, and for 12 years I left Chiang Mai in July and December with the specific feeling of a man who is returning to his real life, and I want to tell you that I had that feeling in both directions, which is either the most honest thing I can say about this or the most self-serving, and I have not been able to decide which. The 7 grandchildren I have described. Let me say something more specific about them, because the grandchildren are part of why December has a date. The eldest, Owen, is 14 and plays defense and has my eyebrows, which on him look determined rather than interrogatory. I have been to 31 of his games. Not sequentially, not every game, but 31 that I know of because I count these things. The third youngest, a girl named Lily who is 6, has decided that I am her preferred grandparent for the purpose of reading aloud, and refuses to believe that any of the others do it with sufficient investment, which is both flattering and accurate. The baby, Rachel's youngest, is 8 months old, and has a habit of gripping my finger with both her hands simultaneously and looking at me with the specific seriousness of a person who has arrived with things to do and is not certain yet whether I will be useful. I think about these children when I think about December, not in the way of worrying what they will think. They are too young for most of it to reach them, and the older ones will process it through their parents' response, which I cannot control. I think about them in the way of what it means to be known to them. Owen knows me as the grandfather who comes to his games. Lily knows me as the right reader. The baby knows my finger. In December they will know something different, and the something different will take time to settle into the right shape. And what I am hoping, not expecting, hoping, is that the shape will include room for the man they already know, as well as the man I am also telling them I am. Before I do, I need to say something about what the Winnipeg life actually was, not as a list of achievements, but as an experience, because the list of achievements is available on the retirement program, and what I want to give you is the weight of it. 31 years as a principal is not a long tenure with a good work ethic. It is a relationship with 1,100 families, which is to say, with 1,100 sets of anxieties and ambitions and needs, all of which at various points between September and June arrive at your office door. I knew children who were hungry, and children who were frightened, and children who were extraordinary, and children who needed something I could not identify, and spent years trying to locate. I hired 247 teachers. I fired 11, which was the hardest 11 days of my career, and I have never stopped wondering about 2 of them. I presided over 3 deaths, 1 student, 1 teacher, 1 parent in the parking lot after a winter concert, and the aftermath of each one taught me something different about what an institution owes the people inside it. And I tried to learn from all 3, and I probably only got 2 of them right. The school is still there. The enrollment is higher than when I left. The culture I built is, according to the current principal, who was one of my teachers, still recognizable. That is the sentence I am most proud of from my professional life, and it is true, and it belongs to the same man as everything else I am about to tell you. The Winnipeg life. 46 years of marriage to Margaret, who is a retired nurse, and who ran our household, raised our children, kept our friendships, organized our life with the precision and the quiet competence that I have relied on entirely, and which I have never once deserved less of than she deserved in return. My children, James, 44, in Toronto, a civil engineer. Rachel, 41, in Winnipeg, a social worker. Are people I am proud of in the way a father is proud when the children exceed him in the things that matter, which they have. The 7 grandchildren I have described. The school, which I grew and which exists, populated by students who will not know my name in 20 years, but who learned in rooms I built and with teachers I hired, and according to a culture I spent 3 decades constructing. The church, where I have read the lessons and distributed communion and sat on the buildings committee and driven the van for the food bank on the second Saturday of every month since 2004. The reputation, which is real, and which I have earned, and which I am about to complicate, and which I have not earned under false pretenses. I have been a good principal, and a committed deacon, and a devoted grandfather, and none of those things were performances. And this is what I most want anyone who knows me in Winnipeg to understand. The man who did those things is the same man who is telling you this, and both of those men are true. The Thailand life. Nak, who is now 49, who left the guest house in 2004, and moved to Bangkok where she works in the administration of a tourism company. We have, across 22 years, been in each other's lives at a level and with a consistency that I find, at 74, genuinely difficult to name, because the words available to me, affair, second life, kept woman, are all wrong, and wrong in different ways. She is not kept, she has her own income and her own life, and her own friends, and has, I believe, had relationships with Thai men across the years that she has not reported to me and that I have not asked about. She has a son, Krit, born in 2013, whose father is, and I want to say this plainly because the plainness is the point, me. I did not know about the pregnancy until Krit was 2 months old. Nak told me in a phone call in January 2014, matter-of-factly without drama or demand, and she said she would raise him alone, and that she was telling me because I had a right to know, and not because she needed anything. I sent money immediately. I have been sending money every month since February 2014, $800 Canadian a month, which I have managed within my retirement income by categorizing it in my own accounting as investment expenses, which is a lie so banal and so technical that it almost escapes the category of lie and becomes merely a filing decision, except that it is not. I want to hold the question of Krit separately from everything else, because it is the question that is hardest and the one that has changed most clearly what I am prepared to do in December. Before Krit, I had managed 22 years of parallel lives with the logic of a man who had concluded that nothing irreversible was happening, that the two lives were genuinely separate, that each was real in its own register, that no one was being harmed in ways they would feel if they knew. That logic is the logic of a careful man who has managed his behavior without managing his accounting. And if you are a man who has managed organizations, you know exactly what that means. The operations look fine, the numbers look fine, and the liability is in the category nobody is looking at. Krit is the category nobody was looking at, and he is 11 years old, and he is doing his mathematics homework in Nakhon Ratchasima, and he does not know my name. That is the sentence that ended the 22 years of sustainable separation. Not in a single moment, but slowly, over the years since 2013. And when my doctor used the word cancer in October, what I felt, before the fear, before the management thinking, before any of the reasonable adult responses, was relief. Not about the cancer, about the permission. The logistics of 22 years are both more complicated and simpler than people expect. Complicated. 41 trips, each one requiring a reason, a cover story, a travel booking that could be explained if the credit card statement were examined, and a returning home that required the transition from one register to another within the duration of a flight from Hong Kong to Vancouver. Simple. Margaret trusts me, and because she trusts me, she does not check, and because she does not check, the logistics do not require sophistication, only consistency. The cover story for most of my trips has been professional development and educational consulting, which is a category of activity plausible enough for a school principal and vague enough to explain 4 to 10 days of absence twice a year without requiring specifics. I have, to maintain the plausibility, attended actual education conferences in Asia and brought back conference materials and occasionally made brief presentations at schools in Chiang Mai that were genuinely useful and that I am not going to pretend I feel bad about, because the schools were real and the presentations were honest, and the days I spent on them were among the most professionally satisfying of my late career. The deception is not total. Very little about a life that is genuinely lived is total. I have written the confession 112 times. I know it is 112 because I keep them, in the same insurance documents folder, labeled Draft 1 through Draft 112, and the earliest is from 2006, and the most recent is from the Wednesday before last. They are all different. The first ones are dense and explanatory, the voice of a man who believes the right arrangement of facts will produce a good outcome. The middle ones are shorter and more honest about the limits of explanation. The recent ones, the ones from the last 3 years, since Crit started speaking clearly on video calls, are different again. They are not about explanation at all. They are about asking, which is harder. I have been asking, in the recent drafts, to be believed that I am both things, the man at St. Andrews and the man on the call with Crit, and that both of them are true. I do not know whether that is believable. I do not know whether it should be. I know that it is true. The DNA kit came 2 Christmases ago, from James, who thought it would be fun. The whole family tracing ancestry, comparing results. Let me tell you about the video calls first, because the video calls are what made the DNA kit so charged when James handed me the box. Nak and I have been calling on video since it became possible. The technology improved, and so did the calls. And at some point, about a year after Crit could talk clearly, he started appearing on the calls. At first briefly, at Nak's invitation, as a thing a mother shows a man who has a right to see. Then longer, as Crit became curious about the man on the phone, and Nak allowed the curiosity to develop without telling him what to do with it. He knows some English. His school teaches it from grade 1, and on our calls he uses it carefully, the way a person uses a tool they are still learning to trust. He has asked me, once, what my job is, and I said I used to run a school, and he said how many people, and I said 1,100, and he said is that a lot, and I said yes, and he nodded in the serious way that Nak says is his characteristic response to information he is filing. He asked me once whether I had children, and I said yes, 2, and he asked their names, and I said James and Rachel, and he said those are English names, and I said yes, and he went back to his homework. I do not know whether he understands, at 11, what he does not yet know. I have thought about this often. I expect he understands something. Children who are told simplified versions of things usually know that the simplification has a shape, even before they can name the full one. The DNA kit came 2 Christmases ago. From James, I want to describe what happened when I opened it, because it was the clearest version of a feeling I have been managing for 22 years. I held the box for about 4 seconds. The room continued normally around me. The children were opening their own presents. Margaret was handing out things. James was grinning at his phone. And I understood, in those 4 seconds, that I was one postal envelope from the collapse of everything. The kit uses saliva. Crit would not be in the system. Nak would not be in the system. There was no one in that database who would create a connection visible in a report. I knew this. I had known it before James handed me the box. And yet the 4 seconds happened, and the 4 seconds told me something that I had not fully reckoned with. That the management of 22 years had never been security. It had been luck. And the luck, at 74 with cancer, was the thing I was most tired of depending on. I did the kit. The results showed expected Northern European heritage and were entirely unremarkable, and James was delighted, and Margaret said she always suspected Scottish on her mother's side, and I smiled and agreed and filed it. But I kept the box. I do not know why I kept the box. It is in the insurance documents drawer, the physical one, the one in my home office where I do the accounts, and I look at it when I am at the desk, and it has become the object I have my clearest thinking near, which is perhaps its own kind of commentary. In December I am going to tell James and Rachel first, together, at dinner, on the evening of the 15th. I have chosen the 15th because it is a Saturday, and because neither of them has work obligations on a Sunday, and because the conversation, however it goes, will require a Sunday. I am going to tell them before I tell Margaret, which I know is wrong in one direction and necessary in another. Wrong because Margaret is my wife, and she should not be second. Necessary because James and Rachel are, in the geography of the immediate aftermath, the people I am going to need, and I cannot tell Margaret without knowing whether James and Rachel will be there for her. That is the calculation, and I am not presenting it as anything else. What I am going to say is this. I have lived 2 lives. They have both been real. There is a child in Nakhon Ratchasima who is my son, and who I have supported financially, and who does not know my name. I am going to say it in those words, in that order, without additional explanation until they ask, because I have written 112 drafts, and learned that explanation before comprehension is a form of self-defense that the listener feels as an obstacle. I am going to answer what they ask. I am going to be wrong in whatever way I am going to be wrong. I want to give you the texture of my life now, between October and December, because the between matters in a way I could not have anticipated. The cancer is manageable. PSA levels, quarterly monitoring, a urologist who is calm and specific, and who uses language I appreciate, because I have spent a career using language to manage institutions through fear. I have told Margaret about the cancer. I have not told her about December. I go to the hospital appointments and she comes with me, and she asks the right questions, which are the questions I would have asked if I were on her side of the table. And the urologist answers them, and I watch Margaret process the answers with the watchful efficiency of a retired nurse processing clinical information. And I think, watching her, this woman has been my partner for 46 years, and she is managing my illness better than I am, and in December I am going to give her a piece of information that will reframe 46 years, and I do not know what the reframing will do to her. I have thought about this more than I have thought about anything except the December plan itself, and I have reached the conclusion that I cannot know, and that the not knowing is not a reason to delay, and that I have delayed long enough. The winters in Winnipeg, when I am being honest about them, are an argument for Thailand. Not morally, I am not making a moral argument for Thailand, but meteorologically. From November to March the city is cold in a way that is not romantic and is not picturesque, and is simply cold, and I have spent 51 winters in it, and I am still not accustomed to it in the way that Winnipeg people claim you become accustomed to it. The January calls with knock and crit happen when there is snow on the window, and he is on summer break, and showing me a football he has learned a new move with. And the calls are warm, in a way that the January light through the window is not. And I have sat with that contrast for years, and have never resolved it into something either noble or ignoble, because it is simply the specific geography of a life that runs in 2 climates. I go to Owen's hockey games on Saturdays when Rachel brings the children. I drive the food bank van on the 2nd Saturday of the month. I read the lessons at St. Andrew's on alternate Sundays, and Margaret comes every time and sits in the 4th pew from the front, which is where she has sat since 1989. I cook dinner most nights because I am the better cook, which is one of the few domestic competitions I have ever won with conviction. These are the things I am, and they are going to continue being true in December, and after December, changed in their context, unchanged in their content, and I am asking, not of you but of myself, whether that continuity is enough, and I believe it is, and the believing is not comfortable but it is firm. I am going to answer what they ask. I do not know what Margaret will do. I have spent 22 years imagining Margaret's response, and all of my imaginations have been wrong, in the specific way that imaginations are wrong, which is that they cannot account for the actual person, and Margaret is an actual person of considerable force, and she will have a response that is hers, and not mine, to predict or to manage. I want to say something about knock. She knows I am going to tell my family in December. I should say something about what knock has been, because describing a double life without describing both people in it is the kind of narrative economy that becomes dishonesty. Knock is 49. She has a degree from Chiang Mai University, a management position at a Bangkok tourism company, an apartment in the Lat Phrao district that she decorated herself over 3 years in a way that is specific to her and that I recognized immediately as her because I have been watching how she inhabits spaces for 22 years. She is not a woman who has been waiting. She has a life that runs independently of mine, which is the only sustainable arrangement for what we have, and she has built it with the competence she has always had and without reference to my schedule or my availability. I send money, the 800 Canadian dollars a month, and she accepts it for crit, and uses it for crit, and does not otherwise rely on it, which she established from the beginning as a matter of principle, and which I believe is a matter of principle and not performance. When I told her about the cancer in October, she said she was sorry, and she asked the right questions. The clinical ones, the ones about management and timeline. And when I told her about December, she was quiet, and then she said she thought I should have done it years ago, and that she was glad I was doing it now. She is not glad on her own behalf. She does not benefit from December. What she is glad about is the same thing I have been thinking about for 3 years, which is Crit, who is going to be 12 next year, and who is going to need, in the years after that, information that his mother cannot give him alone, and which requires me to have been honest before he is old enough to need it. I want to say something about Nak. I told her in September, on a call, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said she thought it was the right thing, and that she hoped it went as well as it could go, and she did not say anything about what she and Crit would be after December, and neither did I, because that conversation is the one that comes after, and December is not yet, and I am doing one thing at a time. What I will say about Nak is this: she has been the person I am most honestly myself with for 22 years, and that is not a small thing, and it is not a thing I can fully account for within any moral framework I have been given, and I have tried several. She is not a victim, and she is not innocent, and she is not guilty, and she is not my wife, and she is the mother of my child, and she is the person who said, in September, that she thought it was the right thing. I am trusting her judgment about my life, which is the thing I have most often done in 22 years, and it has most often been correct. Margaret. I want to say something about Margaret that is not inside the structure of the December plan, just something about who she is. She makes a tomato soup in the winter from a recipe her mother gave her that has been making the house smell a specific way since 1978. She has the recipe on a card in her handwriting, the original card, and the card is stained from the years of use, and has been laminated, probably in the 90s, and the laminating has not improved it aesthetically and has made it durable, which is exactly what Margaret does to things she decides to keep. I have watched her make the soup 40-odd times. She does not measure. She knows what it needs by the smell of it at each stage, which is the kind of knowledge that is not transferable and not teachable, and which represents a depth of experience that I have been the grateful recipient of for 4 decades without being able to reciprocate, because I measure everything. She spent 29 years as a nurse. When she sits with me at the cancer appointments, she is a different version of herself, the one who trained on wards and who processes clinical information with the specific speed of someone who has spent a career moving between assessments, and I watch her in those appointments with the feeling I have had since 1978, which is that I married a person significantly more capable than myself, and that I have been fortunate to operate in the proximity of that capability, and that what I have done to her over 22 years is the worst thing I have done to anyone. I am going to tell her on the evening of December 20th, which is the Saturday after I tell James and Rachel, which gives them 5 days to decide how they are going to be in the room with her, and to make that decision before I ask it of them. I do not know what she will say. I have imagined it, as I have said, and my imaginations are wrong. What I know about Margaret is that she has resources, not financial, though those, but the other kind, the internal kind, that comes from 46 years of being the most reliable person in every room she enters, and that I am going to ask those resources to do something I have no right to ask them to do, and they may or may not be sufficient, and that is not a decision she made and not a question she has had the chance to prepare for, and it is, in the accounting that is clearest to me now, the line I am most ashamed of. Not the Thailand life, the Margaret line, the 46 years. The soup smells the same in December as it did in 1978. I am going to make sure I am home for it before the 15th. Margaret. I want to say something about Margaret that is not inside the structure of the December plan, just something about who she is. She makes a tomato soup in the winter from a recipe her mother gave her that has been making the house smell a specific way since 1978. She spent 29 years as a nurse, and when I see her at a medical appointment, which happens more now, she is a different person than the Margaret I live with. Watchful, specific, a step ahead of the doctor. And I find that person as impressive as I found her when I was 26, and she was new at the hospital, and I knew within 3 conversations that I was going to marry her. She has been faithful to me without reservation for 46 years, as I have said. She deserved a man who was faithful to her, and she did not get one, and she does not know this, and in December she will know, and what she does with knowing is not in my control and never has been. The boy in Nakhon Ratchasima is 11 years old. He is strong at mathematics and poor at sitting still, and he has, his mother says, my capacity for stubbornness, which she describes in Thai, and translates for me as the quality of a man who finishes what he starts. I am finishing this now. Not the double life. That finished in October when a doctor said cancer and time rearranged itself, but the silence, which has been the one constant across everything else, and which has been, I understand now, the most expensive thing I have maintained. Not in money, in the specific currency of a man who has spent 22 years being known completely by no one. Margaret knows the public man. Nak knows the private one. Crit does not know me at all. And no one, across 22 years, has known both. Which means that the man who is both has been entirely alone, and the aloneness has been the cost, and it has been enormous, and I have not discussed it with anyone until now, which is either bravery or its opposite, and I have decided the distinction does not matter, because December is coming regardless. I am going to read the lesson at St. Andrew's on the Sunday before I tell James and Rachel. The passage has already been assigned, 1 Corinthians, the love passage, which I have read before the congregation perhaps a dozen times across 30 years, and which I have always read with feeling, and which I am going to read again with all the feeling I have, because it is true, all of it, every word of it, and the truth of it is not diminished by the man reading it, and the man reading it is the only man I have, and he is going to stand at that lectern on the Sunday before the 15th, and read about love being patient and love being kind, and love not seeking its own, and he is going to mean every word, and then he is going to go home and make dinner, and the following Saturday he is going to sit down with his children and begin. I want to tell you what I expect to happen after December, not as a prediction but as a preparation, because preparing for things I cannot control is the only skill I have left. I expect James to be quiet first, and then systematic, which is who he has always been. I expect Rachel to be the opposite, and I expect her opposite to be more manageable than his quiet, because Rachel's responses arrive in the room and can be responded to, while James's go somewhere internal and emerge later, in a different form, and the later form is harder to navigate. I expect Margaret to do something I have not anticipated, because Margaret has always done something I have not anticipated when things are difficult, and across 46 years, the unanticipated things have almost always been, in retrospect, correct. I do not expect forgiveness in December. Forgiveness, if it comes, will come in its own time and in a form I do not get to specify, and I have accepted this, which is not the same as being at peace with it, but which is, at 74 with a slow cancer and a deacon's position and 1,100 families in the memory, the best I can manage. I am going to read the lesson at St. Andrew's on the Sunday before I tell James and Rachel.